Now, the batch data process flow diagram. I highly encourage you to keep this diagram as a reference diagram, not only for your demos, not only for your labs, but when you're actually working on a project. This is really a checklist. Notice all the various phases, starting from left to right, and then I'll discuss each phase in details. Notice that extreme left, you have your source systems. So you first identify what are your available source systems. What attributes from the source systems are you going to bring in? How are you going to bring that in? So the source systems is really an analysis phase outside of the scope of the MDM hub, but it's a necessary pre-analysis. Perhaps some data profiling, perhaps data analysis could have been done. Maybe you're lucky enough to have Power Center from Informatica or data quality from Informatica. So some sort of other processing could have happened at the original source level. Now, what happens to that data? Well, we're going to bring it in to the landing phase. So strictly speaking, from the moment in the landing phase all the way to the extreme right hand, all that is the hub. Now, the landing phase is sort of an artificial phase. It's data. It's the way we bring in data into the hub. Remember, the sources is external. We're going to have to bring it in. We could use Power Center ETL tool to bring it in, or whatever you want to do. Type it in, whatever you want to do. In our demos and in our labs, we're going to use Oracle store procedures or scripts to load data. But if you have Power Center, you can bring it in. So the landing phase is sort of artificial. It's raw data that has been introduced to the hub. It is not data that can be matched. It is not data that can be cleansed. It is not data that can be merged at all. It's sort of not really in the based objects or the hub yet, but it's a staging area, a dirty staging area that we bring in. So that's called the landing phase. Now we move over to the staging phase, and let me pause for a moment and describe several things. When I talk about the phase, there's two things going on. One is the configuration of the phase, and the other is the execution of the phase. So we're always going to configure the phase, and then if we want to actually see the results, we're going to execute that. So in the staging, the configuration phase means that we're going to set up what's called mappings. Mappings are objects that take landing data and at execution actually change the data and put it in staging tables. And so the staging phase is very important. It really is the beginnings of where we begin to bring in data to the hub. Another important thing of the staging is delta detection. If you're bringing data today and then tomorrow, the staging phase can be configured to bring in only the delta data, only the new records, or you can bring all the records. We'll see in the demos, and you'll be doing this in your labs, how you can configure this. Now, the staging phase configuration, depending on how you configure it, will also make use of a reject table, of a raw table. So the reject and raw are optional supporting tables depending on how you configure the staging process. So the key things there are the mappings, the delta detection, and if you want to set up the raw, the audit, and the reject tables. Now, at the execution phase, then that's where we are invoking the cleanse servers to move data from the landing, process it, cleanse it, and move it over to staging tables. Staging tables are members, are attributes of based objects. Okay? And the next phase will be the loading phase. Now, as I said earlier, every phase has a configuration and an execution. Well, what's going on in the load process phase in terms of configuration? Extremely important. This is where we are going to set up our trust. The whole concept of trust, we have a whole module to talk about it in much more detail. But essentially, if you have more than one source system bringing in data, then it makes sense to consider setting up trust. Trust is basically a way to have two competing attributes win over the other. And we'll see that more in the next few slides that follow. So from the configuration in the load process, we're primarily concerned about the trust setting it up. At the execution, very important, when we execute the load process, guess what? It is the first time that we've actually moved data into the based objects. So the load process at execution actually moves data into the based object. And what is a based object? If you look at your screen, those green spheres and blue spheres at the bottom that says target data model, those are your based objects. If we had executed the load phase, we will now have data. If we go into our ORS and see is there data, the answer will be yes. First time we have actually populated data into the based objects, which are, in our case, Oracle tables. So every based object is from a modeling, it's your entity. From an MDM hub perspective or technical perspective, it is one table or a set of supporting tables that make up the based object. And the load process is the first time we get data into that. We'll be able to update it or insert it anew as we continue to configure it. Now, in addition to this phase, we also see that we have the trust framework. Now, in the slides that follow, I'll talk more about it, but essentially trust is a way to deal with trust. The trust of the data that is reliable, but decreases reliability due to decay, due to aging, or due to new data coming in. Also, this is where we can set up our match rules. They can be executed manually or automatically. Our merge rules that can be set up to execute automatically or manually. So there's a lot of things going on here in the final stage, the trust framework. Trust framework as well as the target data model. And just one last point, way at the bottom of the screen where you see the various tables X reference, all those are the supporting table. One based object, depending on how you configure it, could have up to approximately 11 supporting tables. It's a very complex object. It looks easy, but it's very complex. Now, all those phases, the landing, the staging, the load, the trust framework, match, merging, all that is what is going on in the hub. You're going to be doing all this. The goal is that we end up, after we have successfully matched, after we have successfully humanly went through the data that was exception data, we should end up with golden records. Now, what happens now? The extreme right shows you that. You can feed your golden records externally, or externally, other applications can come in and access that data.